The air was crisp that evening in Pinebrook, a small town pressed against the edges of a vast, whispering forest. 12-year-old Ava Carlton tugged her hoodie tighter around her as the late autumn breeze curled under her sleeves. Max, her golden retriever, trotted happily ahead, tail swishing, nose to the ground. The same path, the same time every evening. Ava's walk with Max was a ritual, a moment of calm between school, chores, and the encroaching tug of adolescence. She was a quiet child, but bright, curious, the kind who always asked more questions than most adults could answer. Her mother, Dana, called out from the porch, "Back in 30 minutes, Ava. Dinner's almost ready." Ava waved without turning and disappeared around the hedgerow near the edge of the Carlton property where their land kissed the dense pinewood. Dana watched until the last flick of Max's tail vanished into the trees. Then she returned inside, never imagining that would be the last time she saw her daughter's silhouette walking that path. The clock read 6:13 p.m. By 7 p.m. Dana was on the porch again, pacing. She tried calling Ava's phone, no answer. She tried again. The sun had nearly dipped below the tree line, and the forest was swallowing the last bits of amber light. She called her husband, Mark, who was closing the auto shop. By the time he got home at 7:30, Dana was in full panic. They searched with flashlights. Called out. Whistled for Max. Only the wind answered. By 9 p.m., the local police were at the house. By midnight, the first search teams were combing through the forest trails using dogs, drones, and thermal scopes. The whole town knew Ava. Flyers were printed before dawn. Social media exploded with #FindAva. But there was nothing. No scream heard. No struggle seen. No dropped phone, no shoe, no blood. Even Max, Ava's dog, was gone, vanished alongside her. As if they had both walked into the forest and melted into the shadows. The only thing they found 2 days later was a broken dog leash tangled around a low bush nearly half a mile from the trail Ava usually followed. The metal clip was snapped clean, the kind of break that would have required tremendous force. But there were no signs of animal attack, no fur, no blood, no drag marks. Just the leash. Cold. Still. Alone. Over the following weeks, the town turned itself inside out. Volunteers came in from neighboring counties. Divers searched nearby lakes. Helicopters circled. Psychics called the family with wild visions and vague promises. Suspicion briefly flickered toward the parents, as it always does. But nothing ever stuck. Mark and Dana were shattered, barely functioning. Each interview, each press conference chipped away at their composure. They weren't actors. They were grieving. They were lost. 1 month passed. Then 3. Then 6. The Carlton house grew silent, the laughter gone. Ava's room remained untouched. The bedmaid. Her favorite hoodie draped on the desk chair. Her sketch pad still open to the last page, a drawing of Max, tail midwag, ears up, and the faint outline of pine trees behind him. Whispers filled the town. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she fell into an old well. Maybe she was taken. But nothing, no matter how wild or whispered, explained how a girl and her dog could simply disappear into thin air in a forest crisscrossed with trails, cameras, and boots. Mark became obsessed with the maps. He pinned a giant one on the garage wall, satellite images, topo overlays, crime scene coordinates. He scribbled notes, timelines, walked the woods daily. Dana, meanwhile, grew distant. She began sitting on the back porch for hours, staring into the trees. Not crying. Not speaking. Just waiting. Hoping the wind would carry her daughter's voice back to her. The seasons shifted. Spring came and went. Summer arrived, and with it, the first anniversary of Ava's disappearance. No new leads. Until one morning in early October, just as the air began to turn again, a hunter named Luke Brenner flew his thermal drone over the far north end of Pinebrook Forest. He wasn't searching for anyone, just scouting deer movement ahead of the season. He'd modified his drone with high-range thermal imaging, perfect for tracking large game. But what he found wasn't a deer. At first, he assumed it was an animal bedded down in a ravine just past Copper Ridge. But something about the shape caught his attention. It didn't move like a deer. It didn't breathe like one either. It was too still. Too long. Human-shaped. Brenner hovered for a while. Recorded the footage. Marked the coordinates. Something prickled at the base of his neck, a whisper from his gut that told him this wasn't normal. He didn't want to believe it, but as he watched the glowing heat signature flicker faintly on the monitor, a sinking feeling settled over him. By the time he landed the drone and made it home, he couldn't sleep. He sent the footage to the sheriff anonymously. He didn't want publicity, just clarity. The next morning, the sheriff's office reviewed the footage. By noon, they had assembled a small team. By evening, the ravine at Copper Ridge was cordoned off. And what they found changed everything. The narrow ravine at Copper Ridge wasn't the kind of place anyone visited casually. Dense brush guarded the entrance, and jagged limestone outcroppings cut across any easy path forward. For most of the year, it was inaccessible without serious effort, too steep for hikers, too thick for off-road vehicles, and too far off-trail for most search teams to have scoured thoroughly. But on that chilly morning, a quiet team of 4 sheriff's deputies, 2 state investigators, and 1 retired K-9 handler made the hike down with caution and purpose. At the lead was Deputy Sarah McKinley, a firm-jawed woman who'd been part of the original search effort the year prior. She had walked miles of forest back then, but this spot, this strange hollow choked with moss and briars, was new to her. Using the GPS coordinates from Luke Brenner's drone footage, they zeroed in on the area where the odd heat signature had appeared. Nothing was immediately visible from the ground. No clear opening. No tent. No disturbed earth. The team spread out, walking slowly, watching for anything that stood out. Then someone called out, voice tense, "Over here." A few yards ahead, nestled between 2 large rocks, was an unnatural shape. Not a body. Not a person. A tarp. Worn, brownish-black, tucked so perfectly into the rock face that it almost blended with the surroundings. Beneath it, layers of sticks and brush had been laid, forming what appeared to be a rudimentary shelter. And inside it, just visible through a torn edge, was movement. Breath. Someone or something was inside. Guns were drawn as they approached. McKinley called out, her voice steady but cautious. "This is law enforcement. If you're inside, we need you to step out. Slowly. Hands where we can see them." No response. A pause. Then the tarp shifted. A dog emerged first. Matted fur, ribs visible, one eye crusted shut, but unmistakably a golden retriever. A deputy gasped, "That's Max. That's the girl's dog." The realization hit everyone like thunder. If Max was here. Moments later, a figure stirred behind the dog. A girl, frail, filthy, eyes wide and sunken. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She simply blinked against the light as if it were painful, then reached out and placed a thin hand on Max's back. Ava Carlton. Alive. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the team stared, stunned. The impossible had become real. Medical teams were called. A chopper was requested. Word began to leak before the girl had even reached the hospital. Pinebrook exploded with the news, "Ava's alive." The reunion at Pinebrook Medical Center was the stuff of nightmares and miracles. Dana collapsed the moment she saw her daughter, sobbing into her hands. Mark held Ava like she might vanish again if he blinked. Ava didn't speak at first. She just clung to Max, who never left her side, and stared out the window with wide, unblinking eyes. Doctors confirmed she was malnourished, dehydrated, but otherwise amazingly unharmed. No broken bones. No infection. No obvious signs of abuse. But the psychological trauma was deeper than anyone could guess. Detectives tried to interview her. Ava gave short, confused answers. "I got lost. Max stayed with me. He found food. There was a man." That last part silenced the room. "A man?" Detective Joel Hayes pressed gently. "What kind of man, Ava?" "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head. "No." He watched. Sometimes he left things. Food. Blankets. He never came close. Hayes scribbled notes, questions burning in his mind. Who was he? Why had he kept her alive? Why had he never turned her in? Ava's memories came in pieces. She remembered walking with Max. The trees. A loud sound. A moment of dizziness. Then waking up deep in the woods. No trail. No sense of where she was. Days passed. She drank from creeks. Ate berries. Max brought back dead squirrels. Then one night, food appeared. In a tin. Then water. Then more food. Always left at the edge of her shelter. Hayes wasn't sure what to believe. Could a 12-year-old really survive that long in the wilderness? Even with help? It was extraordinary, borderline impossible. And yet, here she was. Forensics combed the ravine. The shelter was primitive but clever. Stones for heat insulation. Brush for cover. Footprints were scarce, washed away by rain and time. But they found traces of someone else. DNA on a discarded water bottle. A partial print on a tin. Unknown. Male. A man had been watching Ava. Helping her. Keeping her hidden. The question was, why? News vans flooded Pinebrook. Reporters circled the hospital like vultures. The sheriff held a press conference but kept details scarce. "We are focused on Ava's recovery. There is an ongoing investigation. We appreciate the community's patience." Online theories ran wild. Some claimed Ava had been taken by a hermit. Others whispered about cults in the woods. A few even suggested she had run away and invented the man as a story. But no one could explain how a girl could live alone for a year in the forest, surviving on scraps, never seen by hikers, never spotted by drones, until now. Ava's therapist warned the family to avoid pressuring her. "Memories under trauma can twist," she said. "Let her speak when she's ready." Meanwhile, Max became a local hero. The vet said he had several injuries, old fractures, and near starvation. But he never left Ava's side. Wherever she had been, he had been with her. Loyal to the end. Mark became obsessed again, this time not with maps, but with the idea that someone had watched his daughter for a year and never came forward. He left her out there like an animal. "Who does that?" he raged one night, slamming his fist on the kitchen table. He let her suffer. Dana was quieter. She sat with Ava at night, stroking her hair, whispering, "You're safe now. You're home." But deep in her chest, fear still lived. Because somewhere out there, in the whispering forest just beyond the Carlton property, a man had walked unseen. A man who had found a missing girl and, instead of returning her, kept her in the shadows. And no one knew who he was. Not yet. Ava's return should have brought closure. Instead, it unraveled something darker, questions that clawed beneath the surface of relief. While the town celebrated the miracle, the Carlton house remained under a heavy shadow. Ava barely spoke beyond single-sentence responses. She moved carefully like a deer ready to bolt at any sudden sound. Max stayed by her side constantly, growling softly at strangers, sleeping with one eye open. Even in her sleep, Ava would sometimes whisper, "He's watching." Mark became consumed by this phantom. He spent hours poring over the forensic reports. The partial print pulled from the tin, the unknown DNA sample. The lab confirmed it didn't match anyone in the federal system. No arrests, no convictions, no fingerprints on file. Mark wasn't satisfied. He made a list of everyone who lived near the Copper Ridge area, off-grid loners, hermits, survivalists, even former employees from nearby logging operations. He sent anonymous messages to forums, scanned dark corners of the internet, desperate to match the mysterious man Ava remembered. Sheriff Ray Dunn, a veteran of 2 decades, wasn't far behind. He quietly reopened the missing persons files from the last 15 years, looking for patterns: girls or boys gone missing near wooded areas, sightings of isolated men, footprints that never led anywhere. He brought in the FBI again, this time under quieter circumstances, hoping they might see something the locals had missed. But it was Ava's words that haunted him most. She didn't describe a kidnapper. She described an observer. He watched from far away, she told Dr. Lila Griggs, the trauma counselor. He was always behind a tree. Max barked once and scared him off. But then food would come again. He left things wrapped in leaves sometimes. He never talked. Just looked. Lila pressed her gently. "Did he ever hurt you?" Ava shook her head. "He didn't want me to go. But he didn't want me to die either." Those words repeated in Lila's mind as she sat alone in her office that evening, staring at Ava's drawing. The girl had begun sketching again, quietly, in charcoal. Trees, animals, Max, and always, in the corner of the frame, a tall shadow with no face. Just a presence. Distant, looming, watchful. Meanwhile, the ravine shelter was dismantled by forensic teams. They cataloged every stone, every tarp, every fragment of trash. Behind a cluster of rocks, they found a rusted ammunition box containing a small stash of old canned goods, a first aid kit, and a single Polaroid photograph. The image was blurry, faded, but showed a young boy, no older than 12, standing barefoot in front of a cabin. Handwritten on the back were the words, "Fall 1989 me." Deputy McKinley stared at it for a long time. If this boy was the watcher, he'd grown up in the forest for decades. Unseen, unreachable. The notion was chilling. "How many people live out here in the trees?" she muttered to herself. The truth was, no one really knew. Ava's story gained national attention again. News anchors called it the Wild Girl Mystery. Talk shows debated the morality of her forest guardian. Was he a hero or a monster? Speculation soared, documentaries pitched. But none of the attention brought answers. In fact, it drove Ava further inward. One afternoon, Mark found her curled on the floor of her closet with Max, trembling. They were outside, she whispered. "He's watching again." Mark rushed to the window, but there was nothing but pine trees. Still, he stayed up that night with a shotgun on his lap. Then came the strange break. About 3 weeks after Ava's return, a fire broke out in the woods near Old Briar Hollow, 8 miles from the ravine. It wasn't large, just a smoldering blaze contained within a shallow pit surrounded by handmade stone barriers. Rangers who investigated it found burnt food wrappers, an old tarp melting into the soil, and an improvised metal chimney like the ones found in survivalist camps. But more chillingly, they found dog hair. A sample matched Mac's fresh, not a year old. The campfire was recent, and someone had fled in a hurry. Deputies fanned out across a 5-mile radius. They found vague boot tracks leading north, a trail too light to follow. But the implication was clear. The man, whoever he was still out there. He had remained near Ava even after she was found. He had burned his own camp after the drone discovery. He had stayed close. Dr. Griggs met with Ava again. "Do you think he's still watching?" Ava didn't answer. She simply drew. Her pencil scratched a shape onto the page. The forest, a clearing, a small figure by a campfire. And just beyond the trees, 2 glowing dots. Eyes. The next day, Mark installed cameras around the house. He hired a private security company to scan their property twice a night. Dana quietly packed a go-bag in case they needed to flee. The relief of Ava's return was gone, replaced by the terror that their lives were now tethered to an unseen stalker who lived just out of sight. Despite their fear, Sheriff Dunn held off from making public statements. "No point in panicking the town," he told his deputy. "This man didn't take her. He could have harmed her at any time. He didn't. But we need to find out why he chose to keep her hidden." But the man, if he was a man, was a ghost. No fingerprints. No name. No voice. Ava remembered one thing, though. "I think he was sad," she told her mother one night. "He would sit near the trees. I could see his shoulders moving like crying. Max always growled at him, but I didn't feel scared. Just cold. He had eyes like someone who forgot how to be human." Dana held her close, heart aching. "You're safe now," she whispered again. But in her gut, the words rang hollow. Because safety was supposed to be the end of a nightmare. And yet somehow, this felt like only the beginning. The first time someone really saw him, it was by accident. A local bow hunter named Nolan Keene was deep in the forest east of Bear Hollow where the trees grew close together and the trails dissolved into wild underbrush. He'd been out since dawn and had just begun to make his way back when he caught a flicker of movement through the trees. Not deer, not bear, something taller, upright. He squinted through his scope and saw a man, bearded, thin, wearing ragged layers, walking barefoot through the ferns with an unnatural silence. Nolan froze, watching. The man never looked his way, just kept moving steadily eastward, carrying what looked like a crude satchel over his shoulder. By the time Nolan got back to town and reported what he'd seen, the man had vanished again. Sheriff Dunn and his team scoured the area. They found a few faint footprints, some recent scat, a broken tree limb with hair caught on the bark, human hair. It matched the sample from the tin in Ava's shelter. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just surviving in the woods. He was thriving. Elusive. Experienced. Watching. The FBI came back with new profiling experts. One of them, a behavioral analyst named Tamsin Wolf, studied Ava's case obsessively. After hours of reviewing her drawings, interviews, and timeline, she sat down with Sheriff Dunn and laid it out plainly. This isn't a standard abduction. It's not about power or possession. It's about proximity. He didn't keep her because he wanted to hurt her, he kept her because he didn't know how to let her go. Dunn frowned. "So what are we dealing with? A recluse? A lunatic?" Wolf shook her head slowly. "A ghost. Someone who may have lived in these woods for decades. Raised here, maybe? Someone disconnected from the world. Ferals are rare, but they exist. And he's clearly intelligent, avoided trail cams, left no digital trace, built shelters that blend into the terrain. He's not feral in the wild animal sense. But he's human the way a shadow is part of the light, it only shows when something else is in front of it." That night, Ava had another nightmare. Max barked wildly in his sleep, paws twitching. Ava bolted upright, gasping, eyes wild. Dana rushed in. Ava clung to her, sobbing. He was right outside again. He was crying. I could hear it. Dana tried to calm her, but Ava pushed back and looked her mother squarely in the eyes. "He's not going to stop watching me. Not until he wants to be found." Mark, sleeping downstairs, heard the commotion and rushed up. They stayed with her until dawn. By morning, the fear hadn't faded, it had hardened into resolve. Mark called Sheriff Dunn. It's not enough to search the forest. We need to find out who he is. There has to be a history. Someone that town forgot. It was the right instinct. They began checking old school records from the 80s and 90s. Focused on boys who disappeared young. Those with violent, neglectful homes. Runaways never found. One name stood out, Elias Hart. Born 1978. Reported missing in 1989 from a trailer compound just outside Pinebrook. Parents dead. No siblings. 11 years old. Social workers suspected abuse but could never confirm. When the place burned down in late 1989, Elias disappeared with it. No body was ever found. Sheriff Dunn pulled the faded missing person poster. The eyes were haunting. Wide. Intense. The same as the shape Ava drew, always watching. They ran the DNA again, this time cross-referenced against older paper archives. Finally, a partial match, a distant cousin from Texas who confirmed the family had lost track of Elias decades ago. Wolf stared at the image. If this is him, he's been living in the woods since he was a child. 30+ years. Alone. News of this discovery was kept secret. Dunn didn't want Elias going deeper underground. Instead, they tried a new approach. They brought Ava back to the woods, under protection, surrounded by law enforcement hidden in the trees. She carried Max's leash, walked carefully through the area near the ravine. She spoke aloud, softly, into the woods. I'm okay now. You don't have to hide anymore. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just the breeze in the trees. Then Max lifted his head. He barked once, then again, sharp, alert. His body tensed. Ava turned, and for a flickering second, she thought she saw something in the distance. A figure. Just behind the trees. But when the agents rushed forward, there was nothing. Just snapped twigs and the faintest indentation of a footprint in the moss. That night, a package appeared on the steps of the sheriff's office. No one saw who left it. No camera caught the motion. Inside was a tin box, wrapped in bark and tied with frayed rope. Inside the box, a note, scrawled in shaky but neat handwriting. She belongs to the world again. I never meant to keep her. I only wanted her to be okay. Please don't hunt me. I'm tired. Below the note was a small photograph, Ava sleeping in the ravine shelter, Max curled beside her. The image wasn't taken from close. It was distant, grainy, taken with care. The message was clear. He had let her go. And now he was letting himself go, too. Sheriff Dunn stared at the note for a long time. He's saying goodbye. But Tamsin Wolf wasn't convinced. He's drawing a line. He gave her back. But he's not leaving. He's disappearing deeper. A week passed. No more sightings. No fires. No tracks. No more cries in the night. But the fear lingered in Pinebrook like smoke. Ava began speaking more. She painted again. Laughed softly at Max's tail chasing. But she never went near the woods alone. Not once. Not ever. One morning, while walking in the backyard, she paused at the tree line and whispered something. Dana, watching from the porch, couldn't hear the words. But she saw Ava smile. Just a little. Then turn and walk back inside. The forest swallowed the silence again. Fall deepened its grip on Pinebrook. The trees ignited in shades of red and copper, and the cool wind began whispering earlier each day. The forest, so alive with rustling movement during the summer, now seemed to hold its breath. After Elias Hart's cryptic note, the town had cautiously resumed its rhythm. The sheriff's office stopped issuing updates. Reporters finally packed up and left. Dana began taking short drives again, and Mark returned to work at the garage part-time. But no one in Pinebrook really believed it was over, especially Ava. She'd stopped having night terrors, but the way she walked still carried caution, as if the world itself might snap its jaws open beneath her. She spoke more freely now, mostly to Max or her mother, and her drawings had shifted. Less forest, more home. But sometimes her pencil still sketched that long figure in the trees, always watching, always silent. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning the attic, Mark found something that hadn't been there before. A bundle wrapped in waxed canvas, tied with an old belt. His breath caught in his chest as he opened it. Inside was a journal, weather-beaten, smelling of smoke and pine resin. Pages thick with dirt. At first glance, it seemed like any other survivalist log. Sketches of plants, hunting notes, seasonal changes. But deeper in the book, the entries became more personal. 1996, snow too thick. Rabbits fewer. Ate tree bark again. Heard voices on the ridge. hid under roots. One of them dropped a scarf. It smelled like honey. Kept it. Reminds me of warmth. 2004 saw children at the river. Laughed. I watched from the hollow. One waved. Maybe at a bird. Maybe at me. I waved back but too late. They left. I felt empty. I do not know why. 2013 got sick. Fever. Thought I would die. Dreamed of the house. The fire. Mother crying. I woke up and made a new shelter. Cold keeps out the dreams sometimes. 2022, she walked into the trees. Small. Brave. I followed her from a distance. Max protected her. He watched me. She reminded me of something I'd lost. I left food. I left water. I didn't want her to vanish like I did. Mark sat frozen, the book open in his lap. Every word was like a window into madness or pain. He flipped to the final page. 2023, I gave her back. I watched her sleep one last time. She had dreams again. Not the dark ones. She laughed in her sleep. The dog still growls at me. That's good. She is stronger now. I am tired. But I am still here. Watching the world I can't return to. There was no signature. No address. Just the date. One day after Ava's return. Mark took the journal to the sheriff immediately. Dunn read through it quietly, then looked up with tired eyes. It's him. It's Elias. The writing was consistent with the Polaroid. The handwriting matched the earlier note. And more than that, it told a story no one else could have written. Dunn made the decision not to publicize the journal. If he's still alive out there, this is the closest we'll ever get to understanding why. Wolf agreed. He's not a criminal in the traditional sense. He didn't abduct her. He didn't trap her. He extended her survival. But why not bring her back? Mark snapped. Why not walk her out? Leave a note? Do anything normal? Wolf hesitated before answering. Because in his mind, he's not part of our world anymore. He probably believes he saved her by keeping her away from us. That night, Dana read pieces of the journal by lamplight. Ava sat beside her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder, eyes closed. Do you remember anything more? Dana asked gently. Did he ever talk to you? Ava nodded once, barely perceptible. One time. Only one. Dana waited. It was raining. I was crying. Max had hurt his paw. I was scared. I thought he was going to die. I screamed. Loud. Ava swallowed, the memory threading through her. Then I saw him. He didn't come close. But he said something. What? He said, "You're not alone." The room fell silent. He never said anything else, Ava added quietly. He just left more food the next day. Bandages. He never looked angry. Just sad. Like someone who lost everything. Dana kissed her daughter's forehead, heart torn between rage and a kind of twisted, sorrowful gratitude. A few weeks later, during a community volunteer cleanup near Bear Hollow, a group of teens discovered another campsite. It had been abandoned for days. Inside were signs of deliberate erasure, burnt pages, broken tools, footprints brushed out. But one thing remained untouched, a small wooden carving left neatly on a stone. It was of a girl holding a dog. No one took it. They left it on the stone as if to honor the message. And Elias Hart was never seen again. Searches continued through winter and again into spring, but it was as if he had dissolved into the forest. Some believed he died of exposure. Others whispered he was still there, watching Ava from a distance, slipping between trees like smoke, like a ghost. But eventually, even the whispers began to fade. Ava began therapy in town with Dr. Griggs twice a week. She went back to school in the spring, part-time at first. She sat near the window and always kept Max close during lunch hours. Her friends treated her gently, unsure what to say. She didn't tell them everything. Only that she had survived. That Max had saved her. And that the man in the woods had not taken her, he had simply waited too long to give her back. One warm evening, nearly a year and a half after her disappearance, Ava and Dana walked past the edge of their property where the trees began again. The sun was setting, gold and soft. Ava stopped. Can I say goodbye? Dana nodded, not trusting her voice. Ava stepped toward the trees. Max barked once and sat down quietly. Ava raised her voice. Not loud, but enough to carry past the first line of pines. Thank you, but please, don't watch anymore. Then she turned, took Max's leash, and walked home. Behind her, the forest stood silent. But somehow, For the first time since the night she vanished, it felt like it had finally let go. Spring arrived with hesitant warmth in Pinebrook. The snowmelt revealed a town cautiously rebuilding its sense of safety. The Carlton house bloomed again. Flowers in pots, wind chimes on the porch, a new coat of paint on the mailbox. Ava's hair had grown out, her cheeks slowly filling back in. She smiled more often now, especially when Max barked at birds or chased squirrels across the yard. But there were moments, still moments when her gaze drifted beyond the yard, to the woods. Moments when her fingers went still while sketching, eyes wide, as if remembering some noise, some flicker between the trees. In town, most people had settled into an uneasy quiet. No more sightings of Elias Hart. No more strange footprints, burned camps, or mysterious packages. But not everyone was ready to close the book. Sheriff Dunn still walked a circuit behind his home each night. Mark kept the trail cams up. Tamsin Wolf, though officially off the case, checked in regularly with Dunn, exchanging notes, profiles, and patterns looking for anything similar elsewhere in the country. There was nothing. Elias, if still alive, had disappeared deeper than anyone expected. Until the deer showed up. It was a Tuesday morning when a jogger found it, a deer carcass placed in the middle of the southbound logging road. But it wasn't roadkill. It had been deliberately arranged. Its legs folded neatly beneath it as if sleeping. Its antlers adorned with woven pine branches and strips of cloth. At its side lay a stone, flat, round, and painted with a red circle in the center. Sheriff Dunn stood over the scene, lips pressed tight. "This wasn't a hunter," he muttered. "This was a message." The cloth strips were old, one matched a pattern sold by a feed store that hadn't operated since the late 90s. The paint on the stone was homemade, possibly berry juice or mineral dye. Primitive but purposeful. A symbol. A sign. Theories swirled again. Was Elias warning someone off? Honoring something? Mark believed it was a message to Ava. He wants her to know he's still out there. Still watching. But Dana thought differently. She believed it was a farewell. It's a burial. A ritual. He's leaving the last piece of himself behind. Ava, when told about it, said nothing. Just drew quietly for the rest of the evening. When Dana checked the sketchbook later, she found a new drawing, the deer, exactly as it had been found, with one change. Behind it, a shadowy figure walking away, head down, hands empty. Meanwhile, another strange clue surfaced. A local hiker stumbled across an old hunting cabin nearly 15 miles from Copper Ridge, deep in a no-trail zone. The cabin had long collapsed, swallowed by vines and time, but tucked under a slab of wood was a tin box wrapped in waxcloth. Inside was a tape recorder, dusty and corroded, but still intact. When the FBI retrieved it and managed to clean the audio, they found only one recording. A man's voice. Soft, rough with age, but clear. "I was never meant for the world. I was born inside something broken. I left it behind before it swallowed me. But I watched. For years. I watched others grow, love, laugh. I forgot how to speak without scaring the air. I saw her and remembered something soft. Not mine. Never mine. Just a reminder. I gave her back. That's all I could do. No name. No location reference. Just that voice. And the ache in it that made even the agents fall silent when they listened. After that, there were no more signs. No more sightings. No more deer. Nothing. As if Elias Hart had written the final line in a story only he understood and then vanished into the earth. The town finally held a community event to honor Ava's survival. They called it a Night of Light, held near the old Pinebrook amphitheater just outside the forest. Lanterns were released into the sky. Kids played music. Dana gave a short speech thanking the community, the sheriff, and Max, who now wore a shiny blue tag marked Protector. Ava stood beside her quietly. She didn't speak to the crowd. But at the end of the evening, as everyone was packing up, she walked alone to the edge of the woods and set down one final lantern. It was shaped like a small house. She lit the wick, watched it glow, and let it drift into the dark. The flame bobbed and floated upward, slow and steady, before disappearing above the trees. Back home, life settled into something close to normal. Ava returned to school full-time in the fall. She joined art club, took up track, started laughing again. Dana resumed teaching music lessons. Mark fixed up the old truck he'd been meaning to restore. The weight of Elias's shadow faded but never completely vanished. Max passed away the following spring, quietly in his sleep at Ava's feet. She didn't cry right away. She buried him under the willow tree behind the house and placed one of her carvings there, a dog curled around a girl. That night, a heavy rain fell. The wind moaned through the trees. Ava stood on the porch, watching the sky, whispering goodbye to the only living being who had shared the forest with her and brought her home. Later that month, Dana found a single pine cone on their front step. Perfectly intact. Wrapped in twine. She didn't tell Ava. She simply took it inside, placed it in a box marked May beside Max's collar, and shut the lid. The forest never spoke again. But some nights, when the wind shifted just right and the trees bent softly, you could almost believe someone was still out there. Watching. Not with menace, but with memory. Time has a way of softening even the deepest scars, but in Pinebrook it didn't erase them, it simply taught people how to walk around them. By the time a full 2 years had passed since Ava's disappearance and return, life had stitched itself back together in subtle, careful threads. Ava was now 14, quieter than most girls her age, but strong in a way that no one could quite name. She had become something of a quiet legend in town. People looked at her like they were afraid to speak the wrong word in front of her, afraid they might somehow summon the woods again. But Ava never flinched. She carried herself with a grace earned, not learned. Her art had taken a deeper turn. She painted now, not just drew. Canvases began to stack in her bedroom, sweeping forest scenes, bursts of light between thick trees, animals peeking through thickets, and often in the far corners a faint outline of a figure. Always alone, always on the edge of the frame. She never signed her name on those ones. At school, her favorite subject was literature. Her teacher, Ms. Langley, once asked the class to write about a moment that changed them. Most students wrote about vacations or pets or arguments. Ava turned in a single page with a sentence written in careful script. I walked into the forest thinking I was alone, but someone was already there waiting not to take me but to see if I would survive. Ms. Langley gave her an A, then called her parents out of concern. But Dana and Mark simply said, "That's Ava. She remembers." Meanwhile, Sheriff Dunn had quietly retired. The new sheriff, a younger woman named Trina Wallace, inherited the cold case files and inherited the silence that came with them. She kept the Hart folder in a locked drawer. Occasionally she would reopen it, reread the note Elias had left or the transcript from the tape. But nothing ever changed. There were no sightings, no hints. Elias Hart had truly vanished. Or perhaps he had simply gone further inward, deeper into a world none of them could reach. But the forest wasn't done yet. In midsummer, during an unusually dry stretch, a brush fire broke out near the eastern edge of Pinebrook Forest. Rangers responded quickly, containing it within a mile radius, but the flames revealed something long hidden beneath layers of moss and decay. A collapsed root cellar, stone-walled, handmade, cleverly disguised. Hidden inside were remnants. A decayed cot, rusted knives, torn tarps, faded Polaroids stuck to the walls with tree sap. Most were of trees and birds and rivers. But one stood out, a photo of Ava, taken from a distance. Her face partially turned, Max visible beside her. The same clothes she'd been wearing on the day she disappeared. The timestamp on the film matched the week she vanished. Sheriff Wallace called the FBI, who again returned with questions no one could answer. There were no fingerprints, no footprints. Only one object that offered a clue. A page torn from an old book, stuck beneath a rock in the corner of the cellar. On it were 6 words, burned into the paper with a hot nail or wire. Some things stay safer in silence. The discovery was never released to the public. Only Ava's family was told. Dana wept silently upon hearing. Mark clenched his jaw and nodded. Ava said nothing. That night, she asked for the photo. "Are you sure?" Mark asked. "You don't have to keep it." "I want to," she said softly. He took care of it. She pinned the photo to her bulletin board. Not out of fear, not from obsession, but remembrance. And then, for the first time in nearly 2 years, she returned to the woods. Not alone. She walked with her father, through the old trails they used to hike before the world changed. They passed the spot where the leash had been found, past the ridge where Max once barked into the trees. It was quieter now, still. Like the forest itself had exhaled and gone to sleep. At a small clearing, she knelt and placed a single white stone in the center. "Why here?" Mark asked. "He came here once," Ava said, her fingers brushing the earth. "When I was crying. He left soup. In a tin." Mark swallowed hard. "Do you think he's dead?" "I don't know," she answered. "But if he's not, he'll see this. And he'll know I remember. They stood in silence for a while until birds began to sing again and the wind stirred the leaves like whispers. Later that week, Ava began volunteering at the animal shelter. She gravitated toward the nervous dogs, the ones who flinched when touched. She was patient, never pushing. Just being near them, speaking softly, letting them learn how to trust again. Some kids talk too much, the shelter manager joked once. Yours, she just listens. They respond to that. Dana smiled. She had a good teacher. Fall returned and with it came new growth. A small oak tree sprouted near Max's grave. Ava carved a wooden tag and tied it to the young trunk, for the one who never left my side. At school, she began writing short stories. One was about a girl who lived in a tree and befriended a shadow that kept her warm when the nights got too cold. Another told of a silent man who walked between worlds, never seen, never known, but always kind. Her teacher submitted them to a regional contest. Ava won first place. On the day she accepted the award, a stranger watched from the back of the crowd. An older man, worn flannel, graying beard, faded jeans. He didn't speak to anyone. Didn't carry a phone. Just watched, then left before the cameras turned his way. No one noticed him. Except Ava. She didn't flinch. Didn't run. She simply looked in his direction, raised her chin slightly, and nodded once. He nodded back. Then he disappeared into the street and was gone before anyone could follow. That night, Ava didn't draw a shadow in the forest. She drew a bridge. And on one side stood a girl. On the other, a man fading into trees. Between them was silence. But above them finally was light. Winter arrived early in Pinebrook that year, blanketing the town with a softness that hid the sharp edges of memory. Snow filled the cracks in the sidewalks, hushed the creaking branches, and wrapped the Carlton home in stillness. Ava had just turned 15. There was no party, no balloons or streamers, just a quiet dinner with her parents and a slice of pie instead of cake. Dana lit a single candle and whispered to the brightest light in the darkest place. Ava smiled, but her eyes drifted out the window where the woods slept under a veil of snow. She still walked to the edge of the trees sometimes, not to search, not to wait, but to feel the line that divided the known from the unknowable. She'd stand quietly, Max's old collar looped around her wrist, and listen. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of what had happened. What had been survived. School was easier now. Ava had made a few close friends, girls who didn't ask too many questions, who sat with her during lunch and passed her notes in class. She didn't talk about Elias or the forest or the year that vanished. But every once in a while, someone would say something and her gaze would drift, not away in sadness, but deeper. Like she knew more than she let on and chose to protect others from it. Sheriff Wallace visited the Carlton house just before Christmas. She brought an update, a small one. We found another shelter. 10 miles south. Looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. But inside we found carvings. One of them looked like Max. Dana's hand went to her mouth. Ava stood very still. We think he was circling back. Maybe watching. Maybe leaving behind pieces. Wallace hesitated before adding there was one other thing. A tin whistle. Tied with a red string. Hand-carved. Left in the center of the shelter. She pulled a photo from her folder and placed it on the table. Ava reached for it slowly. It was familiar. When she had been sick in the woods, feverish, dizzy, she remembered hearing it. Just once. A single, soft note. She'd thought it was the wind. But now, looking at the photo, she knew it had been him. Elias. Not speaking, but still trying to comfort her the only way he could. After Wallace left, Ava brought the photo to her room and tacked it beside her bed. That night, she had the same dream again, the one that returned every winter. In it, she was walking barefoot through snow, no coat, no map. Max padded ahead, leading her. Trees surrounded her, tall and endless. But in the dream, she never felt cold. And ahead, always just out of reach, was the shadow of a man. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just walked, always watching back to make sure she followed. When she woke, there was frost on the window and the faint echo of a whistle in her ears. As January deepened, Ava began writing more. Not short stories anymore, something bigger. A book. She wouldn't tell her parents what it was about, but Dana peeked one night and saw the title scribbled on the first page, The Hollow Place. Ava never explained it. She didn't have to. One afternoon, a package arrived on their doorstep. No return address. No markings. Inside was a wooden box, hand-carved, its lid sealed with beeswax. Mark opened it with a pocket knife. Inside lay an old compass, brass, worn, the needle still spinning when touched, and a small folded map. The map was hand-drawn, not of roads or towns, but of rivers, ridges, and landmarks deep in the forest. Circles marked several spots. One was labeled with a single word, home. Ava took it without a word, studied it for a long time, then folded it and tucked it into the pages of her journal. She said nothing, but that night she left a small carved fox on the back porch. By morning it was gone. And something else was left in its place, a pine branch tied with black thread. The messages had returned, not loud, not threatening, but there. Symbols. Gestures. Ava never feared them. She understood them as clearly as language. Mark didn't share that comfort. He's still out there. Still watching. Dana answered softly, but not for her. Not anymore. For himself. As spring approached, rumors began to rise again. A hunter near Sparrow Ridge reported seeing movement, too fast for a deer, too tall for a bear. A ranger found strange markers carved into trees in a pattern like a code. And a group of hikers claimed they heard music late one night, faint, haunting, like a whistle drifting through fog. None of it could be confirmed. None of it led to Elias. But Ava started leaving small things on the edge of the forest again, drawings in jars, feathers tied with string, pebbles stacked in threes. A private language. One not meant to call him back, but to thank him. To let him know. She had grown. She had lived. And he could rest. One evening she returned from the woods with a faint scratch on her arm. Dana rushed to her side, alarmed. "Are you okay?" Ava smiled. "I just got too close to a bramble. Nothing followed me, Mom. Nothing chased me." She paused, then added, "He's not the forest. He's just someone who never left it." And for Ava, the forest no longer held fear. It held memory. A complicated, quiet memory that whispered, not screamed. That left instead of took. That hid instead of hunted. She knew Elias Hart might still be walking somewhere, bones older, breath thinner, eyes still watching. But she no longer needed to see him to feel his presence. He had kept her alive. He had kept himself apart. And now their paths had truly parted. That spring, Ava planted 3 saplings near the ridge, oak, pine, and birch. She didn't say why. She didn't name them. But sometimes she visited them and sat between them, writing in her notebook. The wind always picked up when she did. Not loud. Just enough to remind her that someone had once been there. And that someone still listened. Summer came in waves that year, hot, slow, and lingering, wrapping the town of Pinebrook in a golden haze. For most, it was a season of normalcy. Kids rode bikes again, lawnmowers buzzed through weekends, and the woods, once a source of dread, were just the woods again. Or so it seemed. Ava knew better. The forest never truly went back to sleep. It simply grew quiet when it was being listened to. Now 15, she had grown taller, leaner, with eyes that missed nothing. Her teachers said she was gifted, but not just in the way of grades. There was a presence about her, a patience beyond her years. She could sit in silence longer than most people could stand. She didn't fidget, didn't babble. When Ava spoke, people listened. When she looked at something, they followed her gaze. Some said the forest had taught her how to move differently. Like someone who had learned to survive in stillness. She was nearly done with the first draft of The Hollow Place, the story she had written in fragments over 2 years. Dana had read pieces of it, always stunned by how real it felt. The girl in the story wasn't Ava, not exactly, but the way she described fear, quiet, and the strange ache of being both protected and trapped, it couldn't have come from imagination alone. In the story, there was a man called the Hollow. He had no name, no face. He lived where no map could reach, where sound didn't echo. He didn't speak, but he left gifts. He wasn't evil, but he wasn't good either. He simply was. A boundary. A secret. A mirror. As Ava wrote, she understood something she hadn't known before, not just about Elias Hart, but about herself. He hadn't just kept her alive. He had passed something on to her. Not darkness, but silence. The kind of silence that listens, that endures, that remembers. It was in late July when something strange happened again. A small boy, 9 years old, disappeared from a campsite 2 counties north. His family had been staying in a remote woodland cabin. One evening just before sunset, he wandered out with his toy plane. He didn't return. The search party began immediately, and within hours, helicopters scanned the treetops. Dogs tracked his scent into a dense patch of undergrowth, but it ended suddenly at a dry creek bed. Panic rose fast. But before dawn the next day, the boy returned. He walked out of the woods calmly, unharmed, holding his toy plane. When asked where he'd been, he simply said, "A quiet man found me. He showed me where the safe trees were. Then he made me follow the bird sounds back." Reporters flooded in. Search crews were baffled. The boy's parents wept with relief. But Ava, reading the report online, felt something deeper, a jolt. She printed the story, read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the box where she kept the old photo of Max and the map left by Elias. "Do you think it's him?" Dana asked when she noticed Ava staring into the trees again that evening. "I know it is," Ava said without doubt. "He never left. He just shifted." That night, Ava wrote a new chapter. In it, the Hollow saved another child not by carrying him or hiding him, but by guiding him from afar like wind nudging leaves toward the light. The man in her story still never spoke, but his presence was always known. She titled the chapter, "The Path That Whispers Back." Later, Ava began a quiet routine. Once a week, usually on Sundays, she left a wrapped gift in the woods near the ridge. Sometimes it was a handmade carving, other times a small jar of honey or a note folded tight inside a walnut shell. She never told anyone what she wrote. But the next week, the gift was always gone. And sometimes, something else appeared in its place. A feather, a stone, once even a perfectly intact bird's nest. It became their rhythm, an unspoken conversation. Mark tried to understand, but couldn't. "Ava, are you sure this is safe? What if someone else is out there? What if you're drawing him back?" "I'm not drawing him anywhere," she said gently. "He never left, and he's not watching me anymore. He's watching the forest." Dana, though uneasy, saw what her daughter was doing, not feeding a connection but closing it on her own terms, and she respected it. Then came a storm, late August, a powerful, unexpected front that downed trees and power lines across Pinebrook. In the aftermath, search teams were sent to assess the forest damage. One group, several miles west of Copper Ridge, discovered a collapsed pine with something hidden beneath it, a metal box. Inside were dozens of Polaroids. Most were warped with age, but a few were recent. Images of paths, birds, deer, even families at picnic sites. All from a distance. None intrusive, just watchful. But the final photo was different. It showed Ava, not as a child, but from only a few weeks earlier, walking alone near the saplings she had planted. Standing among them, back turned, arms raised to the sky. The photo had been taken from high up from the trees. No footprints surrounded the tree. No signs of someone climbing it. The storm had knocked the branch down. The camera had fallen with it. The FBI was contacted. They took the photos but made no statements. Sheriff Wallace called Dana privately. "He's not gone. And he's not hiding." Dana asked, "Then what is he doing?" Wallace answered quietly, "He's documenting. Watching the world continue. And making sure it doesn't forget he exists." That night, Ava didn't cry. She didn't even speak. She took the box of gifts she'd received over the years, whistle, compass, pine branch, stones, feathers, and placed them all in a satchel. Then, just before dawn, she walked into the woods alone for the first time since she came back. She wasn't gone long, less than an hour. When she returned, her hands were empty. Mark looked at her, pale. "Where did you go?" "I buried it," she said simply. Dana's voice cracked. "Why now?" Ava looked between them both, her voice firm but soft. "Because now I know. He never kept me in the woods. I stayed until I was ready to come home." That evening, when the sky burned orange behind the trees, a single long whistle echoed in the distance. Soft, grateful, goodbye. Autumn again. The air turned crisp and Pinebrook felt more alive than it had in years. But the change wasn't just seasonal, it was emotional. Subtle, sure, but present. The kind of peace that follows a storm, not because the damage is forgotten, but because survival has carved new paths through the wreckage. Ava started 10th grade in late September. She walked herself to school now. No more looking over her shoulder. She wore Max's collar around her wrist less often, not out of neglect, but because she no longer needed a reminder. His presence lived in her steps, in the way she bent to greet skittish dogs, in the way she listened more than she spoke. She had begun publishing parts of The Hollow Place online. It was gaining attention in quiet corners of the internet. People whispered about the strange beauty of it. The girl who had vanished and returned. The man who lived in silence. The forest that remembered everything. Some speculated it was fiction. Others believed every word. Ava never corrected anyone. She didn't have to. Truth wasn't always something you said, it was something you carried. One afternoon, she received a message through her blog. No name, no profile. Just words. "You told it right. Thank you." She stared at the message for a long time, heart slow and steady. Then, after a pause, she wrote back. I didn't tell it for you. I told it for me. But I'm glad you listened. She never received another message. But the next week, when walking near the woods, she found something half buried beneath the leaves, a single carved feather, smoothed with age, tied with a black string. She took it home and placed it on her bookshelf. No longer a mystery. No longer a puzzle. Just a piece of something she had already survived. But even as Ava grew into her strength, the world continued to echo with remnants. Sheriff Wallace received another tip, this time from a drone operator doing a topographic survey near Cinder Ridge. The thermal camera had picked up what appeared to be a heat signature inside a cave system, miles off any marked trail. A human figure, still seated, unmoving for over 3 hours. By the time a search team reached the location, the cave was empty. But inside, they found a message scratched into the stone wall with a sharpened stick. If I stop moving, I disappear. So I keep walking. No gear, no campfire, just the marks of a life always one step beyond reach. The FBI reopened the file temporarily. Agents theorized that Elias Hart had perfected a form of nomadic isolation. No permanent home, no digital footprint, no anchor. He existed in motion. A man built not to hide from the world, but to live just far enough outside it. Wolf, who had long since transferred out of the bureau, heard about the message and sent a letter to Sheriff Wallace. He doesn't want to be found. He only wants to know that someone remembers he was ever here. And someone did. Ava wasn't afraid anymore. But that didn't mean she had forgotten. She knew trauma wasn't something you escaped, it was something you folded into yourself. Like bark around a wound on a tree, it grew with you, not against you. She held a small exhibit at the town's library in November. Her artwork, canvases of forest edges, shadow figures, dogs, bridges, and empty clearings lined the walls. People came quietly, whispered, cried. One painting drew special attention, a tall man made of branches and moss, barely visible behind a curtain of rain. In the foreground, a child slept beneath a blanket of leaves, guarded by a dog with glowing eyes. Dana stood behind her daughter that night, watching as strangers tried to interpret a story too raw to explain. Do you want to tell them who he was? She asked. Ava shook her head. They already know. Just not in words. Then came the letter. No return address. No postage. Just slipped into the Carlton mailbox sometime between dawn and dusk. It was handwritten, ink-faded, paper slightly torn. I walk until the world grows quiet. And then I sit and listen to how it used to be. Sometimes I remember the girl. The dog. The sound of breath in the cold. I remember that once something gentle walked into my world and left light behind. I will carry that light until I'm no longer anything at all. It wasn't signed. Ava didn't need it to be. She took the letter upstairs and placed it inside the final chapter of her manuscript. The book was done. She printed a copy and mailed it to a P.O. box she'd rented quietly, one she'd included as a fictional address inside the story, disguised in a riddle that only someone like Elias would understand. It was never claimed. But 2 months later, during a late snow, Ava returned from school to find something nestled in the crook of the backyard willow, 3 wooden carvings, lined up side by side. A fox, a dog, and a small girl with a notebook in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She didn't even call her parents. She just stood there, heartful and quiet, and whispered, I know. That spring, Ava gave a speech at the Pinebrook Youth Writers Conference. She spoke not of her own past, but of silence. Of how sometimes the most powerful stories weren't shouted, they were whispered into the wind, buried in roots, folded into pine needles and left for someone to find when they were ready. After the applause, a boy no older than 9 approached her, clutching a copy of her book. My dad said you made up the hollow. Ava smiled softly. Did you think I made him up? The boy shrugged. I don't know. But when I walk in the woods, I listen better now. Then that's all that matters, she said. That night, under a silver moon, Ava placed the wooden girl carving beside Max's grave. The fox and the dog she kept on her desk. The forest slept beyond her window, vast and unknowable. But for the first time, it felt like something sacred. Not because of what she'd lost there, but because of what had quietly saved her, piece by piece, until she was whole again. Rain fell softly on Pinebrook that April, steadier than usual, as if the sky had decided to wash the town clean one layer at a time. Everything felt newer, gentler. And yet, there was something underneath it all, in awareness. The way you notice a missing sound and realize it was always there before. People didn't talk about Elias Hart anymore, not openly. but his presence lingered. In the woods. In the stories parents told their kids to make them careful. In the way Ava still paused at the edge of the forest, head tilted slightly as though listening for a signal too subtle for the rest of the world to hear. It had been over 3 years since she vanished. Nearly 2 since she began leaving gifts at the forest's edge. Now she no longer needed to. Not because she'd stopped believing he was there, but because she had accepted that he always would be whether or not she could see him. And maybe that was the only closure she'd ever get or ever needed. That spring, Ava's book The Hollow Place was picked up by a small publisher. The editors were stunned at its clarity, its emotional weight, its brutal beauty. They assumed much of it was metaphor. They didn't know the author had lived most of it. Ava didn't correct them. She just signed the contract and smiled politely as they discussed marketing plans and launch events. But when they asked her what she wanted on the dedication page, her answer came without hesitation. For the man who vanished into the trees and gave me back my voice. The book launched quietly without national headlines or bestseller lists. But it found the right readers. People who had lost things. People who had survived things. People who had carried silence inside themselves for too long. Ava began receiving letters, handwritten, heartfelt, sometimes from children, sometimes from grown men who said they hadn't cried in 20 years until they read her words. But one letter stood out. No envelope. No name. Delivered in a package that smelled faintly of pine and campfire. Inside was a single page. Old, yellowed, the writing jagged and slanted. A letter not typed, not signed, but unmistakable. You told it true. Not the way I lived it, but the way it was meant to be remembered. The girl with the dog. The forest with no doors. The man who walked until he forgot his own name. I read it. And I wept. There was no signature. But beneath the message, stuck to the page with sap, was something else, a piece of bark carved with 2 initials, AC and H. Ava's breath caught in her chest. She hadn't said his name in months. Hadn't needed to. She folded the letter and placed it inside a hollowed-out book on her shelf. One only she ever opened. By the time summer arrived, Pinebrook had begun preparing for its 100-year founding anniversary. There would be floats, fireworks, speeches. Dana had been asked to coordinate the music. Mark volunteered to drive one of the vintage trucks in the parade. Ava was invited to read a passage from her book at the town hall, something she agreed to reluctantly. She'd never liked speaking in front of crowds. But something about this felt right. Like a circle finally closing. On the day of the event, the sun burned down hot and brilliant. Bunting flapped in the wind and children ran through the streets with ice cream-stained fingers. Ava stood behind the podium looking out at the town that had carried her in pieces and waited while she put herself back together. She read from the final chapter of The Hollow Place, the moment where the girl, now older, returned to the forest not to search but to thank the shadow that once saved her. Her voice didn't tremble. Her hands didn't shake. And just before she stepped away, she added one sentence that wasn't in the book. He didn't teach me to survive. He reminded me I already knew how. Later, while helping clean up, Ava wandered behind the town hall for air. She stood beneath a cluster of trees, letting the shade cool her flushed skin. That's when she saw it. A small item leaning gently against the base of a birch trunk. It hadn't been there earlier. A walking stick. Old, hand-carved, the same whittled texture as the fox she still kept on her shelf. Tied to it was a strip of cloth, green, faded, soft. And on the cloth were 2 fingerprints, pressed in what looked like charcoal. One small. One large. Her breath caught. But not from fear. From recognition. She didn't take it. She didn't call her parents. She just sat beside it for a while, silent, letting the sun drift through the leaves above, and whispered, I see you. When she returned home that night, she sat at her desk and began writing again. Not a sequel. Not fiction. A journal. A letter to herself. There is a place inside me that will always be forest. And there is a place in the forest that will always be me. But I do not belong to it anymore. I belong to now. To breath and fire and the ones who waited. Then she closed the journal and went to sleep. No dreams haunted her that night. Only peace. In the woods beyond Pinebrook, a hawk soared over the treetops. Below, a man in worn flannel and quiet steps continued walking, not running, not hiding. Just moving. Toward nothing. Away from everything. Because for men like Elias Hart, there's no destination. Only the path. And those rare, golden moments where the world whispers back. You were seen. Time in Pinebrook no longer passed in seasons. It passed in memories, quiet, stitched moments that wove together the lives of those who had touched something unknowable and come back changed. The town had grown. A new school building had broken ground. More families had moved in, drawn by its calm charm and scenic trails. Most had never heard the full story of Ava Carlton. A few had heard rumors. Fewer still understood how deep those roots ran. Ava turned 16 in the hush of early autumn. No big party. Just a drive out with her parents, a visit to the ridge where Max had once barked into the trees, and a small celebration in their backyard. Dana made her favorite dinner. Mark fixed up the old fire pit. The wind was gentle that night. Ava sat beside the flame, sketching in a new notebook, her legs tucked under her, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked peaceful. Not just safe, but at home in her own skin. The book had done well, not famous, not viral, but steady, beloved. It was being used in schools now. Kids read it and wrote essays. Teachers sent Ava letters. Some even invited her to speak. She said yes to the quiet ones, the rural places, the small towns with forests on the edges. Places that felt like Pinebrook. She stood in front of rooms filled with nervous teens, shared her story without naming it, told them they weren't alone, told them that surviving didn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It meant growing around it. It meant planting things where things had once been taken. One morning, a package arrived. No return address, no postage. But this time, it wasn't placed at her home. It was delivered to the library, left at the front desk with her name carefully written on a slip of torn canvas. Inside was a single object, a worn journal, stitched from leather and bark, with twine binding. On the first page were 2 words, "My turn." The pages that followed were messy. Sketches, notations, fragments. Elias Hart's voice. Not polished, not planned, but raw and real. He didn't explain what happened in detail. He didn't offer apologies or confessions. But between the lines, Ava found everything she needed. He had fled something long before he met her. A life, a place, maybe even a self he couldn't bear to live inside anymore. The forest wasn't his prison. It was his choice, his refuge. He wrote of storms and shadows and days when he forgot how to speak. He wrote about the sound of a girl crying and how it broke something inside him that had been locked away for too long. He wrote about Max's eyes, about carving figures to pass the time, about the unbearable decision to let her go, to watch her stumble toward freedom, knowing it meant returning to a silence that would never again be clean. Near the end, one page had only this: "She was never mine to save, but I am not the one who did the saving." Ava read it all, alone. She didn't tell Dana or Mark about the journal, not at first. She wrapped it in cloth and placed it in a drawer, beside the first photo ever taken of her after she returned. She no longer needed answers. She had a story now, hers and his, interwoven like trees growing beside one another, separate, but shaped by proximity. Weeks passed. Then came the fire. Late October, during an unusually dry spell, lightning struck deep in the forest, far beyond the ridge. It sparked a blaze that swept through acres of untouched woods. Smoke rose like a gray river into the sky. Ava watched it from her bedroom window, unmoving, heart silent. Helicopters came. Fire crews battled it for days. Eventually, the fire died. But the damage was vast. And somewhere in the heart of that blackened space, they found bones. Human. Old. No identification. No personal items. Just a brass button buried beneath the ashes, marked with an insignia long out of use. The news didn't report it. Sheriff Wallace didn't comment publicly. But a small note was slipped under the Carlton family's door 2 days later. "It's over." Ava didn't cry. She walked into the backyard, stood beneath the willow, and stayed there for hours. As dusk fell, she whispered a quiet thank you. Then she dug a shallow hole and placed the pine branch, the wooden fox, and the compass inside. Covered them gently. Smoothed the dirt. She was ready now. Later that winter, she applied to a summer program, environmental studies and wilderness safety. She was accepted immediately. Her essay was titled "How to Listen to a Place That Speaks Without Words." She planned to leave Pinebrook for a while. Not forever. Just long enough to learn how to care for places like the one that had shaped her. Just long enough to see if the world had other kinds of forests and other kinds of shadows. Dana and Mark watched her go with pride and awe. Not because she was fearless, but because she was honest. Because she had walked through something dark and didn't try to bury it behind a smile. Because she had made peace with the idea that some stories don't have neat endings, only the soft landing of understanding. And somewhere far away, or maybe nowhere at all, a man who once lived without a name was finally at rest. No longer walking. No longer watching. But remembered. In every carving. In every page. In every step a girl once took into the woods and back again. Ava stood at the edge of a new trail that summer, journal in hand, the wind brushing her face like an old friend. She didn't look back. She just whispered, "Let's begin," and stepped forward into the world,